Hello again and welcome back. This is Mark with RC Rotors and for part 2 of our thrust stand mini series. In this video we will be looking at how to wire a watt meter into our thrust stand. So we can see we have a watt meter. This particular one comes from Ready to Sky. There are many different brands out there. I believe Turnigy makes a brand, and just Google RC watt meter and you'll see a bunch of them. But in this video we're going to review how to connect this into our thrust stand. So we see we need a couple XT60 connectors, one that will allow us to connect into our motor ESC combination, and then the other to the source of our power, which would be our LiPo battery. As before, wiring up these XT60 connectors, I usually will turn the metal connectors inside of the XT60 so that they turn into like a cup to hold solder. And we're going to I'm tinning the tip of the soldering iron and heat up that particular connector and fill up the cup full of solder. So just kind of like we did in video 1 if you have seen that. If you haven't, I'll leave a link to the description in the description below for that video as well. Once we get enough solder in the cups, then we will connect our wires, being very careful to ensure that we have the positive and ground connected appropriately. So we'll see here we've got to put some heat shrink over this. Heat shrink over each of the wires so that we don't have any shorts between our wires. In this case I don't have any black readily available, so I'm going to use red and blue, but the heat shrink isn't quite so vital. We do have our wires color coded to make sure that we've got positive to positive and ground to ground. So we're going to heat up the solder, the XT60 connector, and connect in our wire. We will also do the same with our ground lead here. So it's obviously very important to observe that we have the right polarity, otherwise we'll have some problems with blowing up our components. So once we have those connected, the next step is we're going to let them cool off just a little bit, and then we will put some heat shrink onto this connector. So while we let this cool, we're going to go ahead and solder in the other side of the watt meter. On the watt meter we basically have a source and we have a load. The source we want to make sure we wire up to go to our battery connector. So this will need to be a female XT60. And on the load side, we need to make sure we wire up a male XT60 to ensure that that can connect to our ESC motor combination. So again, we're going to tin the tip and fill up the cup of the XT60 connector with solder. And do that on both of them. You always want to make sure that you tin the tip on your soldering iron to ensure good conductivity and transfer of heat to what you're working on to get the best possible solder joint. And like we did on the other side, we're going to wire up our ground and our positive. And now that we've done that, of course, we've got to go back and put our heat shrink over the connectors and shrink them down. So that's really about all there is to connecting up the XT60s to the watt meter. The biggest part of this, of course, is making sure that you have the right connector on each side. You're going to need one of each, one male, one female. We always want to make sure that the source side is able to connect into the LiPo battery and that the load side is able to connect into our motor and ESC combo. So the only thing left to do here is to shrink down the heat wrap and this will be ready to go. So now that we have both connectors installed, we're ready to test out our watt meter. One thing that I always like to do before I plug it into actual components is to ensure that I use a smoke stopper. We're going to plug that into the source side first and plug in our LiPo and make sure as long as the light doesn't come on, then we're in good shape, but if that bulb comes on, then we know we have a problem. That's kind of our fail-safe. What is a smoke stopper? Google it. It will save you money, lots of money, if you have one. It's going to detect any shorts that you have, or any cases where you have power connected to ground, and it will help prevent you from having issues where you blow up your components. So we're going to also plug it in after our watt meter on the load side, so we know that we don't have any issues on the downstream side of things. So now that we've checked that, we could go ahead and wire up everything all the way through, so we can connect our ESC and motor combo to the load side and our LiPo battery to the source side. And from here we can see that the watt meter is turned on. What we can do is we can connect one of these servo testers. Super handy. Super good way to center your servos and check them to make sure that they work. And it also works for this purpose. So we can see when we turn on our servo connector, we're able to see that the ESC will initialize and the motor will spin up for us. So that is going to do it for this video. We'll be back in part 3 of the thrust stand series, where we can actually connect these components to the thrust stand itself and test some different props. We'll be back for part 3. Thanks for watching.